What's going on, my fellow Jedi and Padawans? Welcome back to another Jedi Gaming video. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the channel, and if you guys are new, welcome. We are continuing our ARC 3.0 builds with another banger Titan build for some infinite blinding shoulder charges, as well as blinding people with our special weapon, so nobody can see with this build and you're out there shoulder charging all willy-nilly like. Now, before we get into that, make sure to enter into the giveaway for this Pixio monitor, 144 hertz, down below in the description. Very awesome monitor from Pixio, so make sure to hit up that link down below. Now, in today's video here, like I said, we are going to be on our Titan class with our Striker, having those infinite melees that blind our enemies with the insurmountable Skullfort exotic helmet. To start out with our super, we're going to be using Thunder Crash, just the most fun for me. Fist of Havoc is more of a PvP thing, in my personal opinion. Don't have as much of that damage output that Thunder Crash has for those bosses inside of the PvE realm. Now for me, I'm always running Towering Barricade and Strafe Lift inside of the PvE realm, just seems to work best for me. Now, the important part of this build for our melee, we're going to be throwing on Seismic Strike. So after sprinting for a short time, activate your charged melee to shoulder charge into a target, damaging and blinding enemies in an area around them. When you're amplified, that blast radius is larger, and with this build, we are amplified consistently because of our aspects as well. Now for our grenade, we're going to be running pulse grenades just because, again, for our aspect on Titan, Touch of Thunder, the pulse grenade create ionic traces periodically as it damages targets, and it increases damage over time. So it's nice that we get those ionic traces to get our grenade, melee, and shield back. For our second aspect, we're going to be using Knockout for that extra melee range and damage. After we critically wound a target or break their shield, it infuses our next melee attack with some increased range and damage. Defeating targets with a melee attack starts health regeneration and makes us amplified. That's why we are basically amplified the entire time with the insurmountable Skullfort as well as this melee. It'll come back consistently, so that blast radius for blinding is going to be decently large. Now for our fragments that we're going to be running on this build, we're going to be using Spark of Feedback. Taking melee damage briefly increases your outgoing melee damage, making that shoulder charge even stronger than it was. For our second fragment here, we're going to be using a Spark of Resistance, so it gives us that higher damage increase in resistance because we're going to be hot and heavy inside of all of those enemies, shoulder charging everything we can, and we're going to be using a grenade launcher for our special. For our third fragment here, we got Spark of Recharge. So when we do get critically wounded in this build, our melee and grenades regenerate more quickly. So this is nice for if we do happen to lose our melee, or our grenade comes back just super fast with this recharge procced. And then finally, this one can go in and out, but I'm using Spark of Beacon. So when you're amplified, we're going to be amplified consistently with that knockout aspect and our insurmountable Skullfort using shoulder charge. Your arc special weapon creates blinding explosions as well. So there is two facets that we're going to be blinding everything with our grenade launcher in our special slot, as well as our infinite melee here. Now obviously we're decked out in gold here for the month of September. Having that support in the Destiny community is wonderful. Now for our weapons for this build here, we're going to have Monte Carlo, so weapon damage reduces melee cooldown, and it has that chance to give us our melee back immediately. Basically only using this if I do happen to run out of ammo in my grenade launcher, or if I do happen to lose my melee, get a defeat or two with this weapon, and it comes back pretty instantly. Now, very important for this build, we're going to be using a Forbearance with Chain Reaction and Ambitious Assassin. So when we're amplified and we get defeats with this, with that Chain Reaction, it is going to blind everything in the area via that fragment Spark of Beacons. So this right here with 2 grenades in it, clearing ads, blinds everything in its path. Very, very key for this build and blinding everything. Now, on top of that, we're going to be running Hero of Ages, an arc sword from the Grasp of Avarice dungeon. Has Demolitionist and Chain Reaction on it, so we're going to get those chain of explosions for arc damage, as well as when we get defeats, we're going to be getting our grenade back, that Pulse Grenade, which, because of our aspect, we are getting ionic traces here and there when we do damage with it. So it's a very good synergetic sword for this build in getting our abilities back and then keeping that enemy suppression with having consistent grenades and melees. Now, as you can see, stat distribution over here, we have our 100 resilience and our 100 strength, so we can get our melee back, as well as 60 discipline for those a little bit quicker grenade regens inside of our pulse grenade. Now, this exotic helmet has been around since the dawn of time in Destiny, the Insurmountable Skull Fort. Definitely a go-to for the Titans over the years, with Shoulder Charge having this thing instantly back when you get a defeat with the melee. So that's what its armor perk is in Transfusion Matrix. Kills with arc melee abilities trigger health regen first off, and restore melee energy instantly. Now, for our mods on top of that, we're going to be using Well of Ion, so picking up Arc Elemental Wells causes more melee damage in our next melee. So this is super important because we also have that feedback inside of our fragment that also gives us increased melee damage, so we're going to be merking everything just with one shoulder charge. On top of that, we have Hands On, so every single time we do get a melee defeat, since it's going to be instant and infinite melees that we have, it gives us super energy on those defeats, so we're going to be able to get our Thunder Crash very quickly as well with this build, and then some Grenade Launcher Finder for that Forbearance, so we can keep blinding enemies with those defeats with that weapon as well. So moving on to the arms here, we have Momentum Transfer and Melee Wellmaker. Momentum Transfer causing damage with our grenade reduces melee cooldown, just another facet of being able to get our melee back quick if we do happen to lose it. And then Melee Wellmaker powered melee defeats spawn elemental wells that match your subclass, so we're going to be spawning those arc elemental wells all over the place because I do have 3 melee Wellmakers on, as well as a bountiful well that allows us to stack those 3 melee Wellmakers, which will in turn proc Well of Ions, causing more damage on our next melee attack. Now, on our chest piece here, even though you can't see it, it is on here. We have Bountiful Wells. We just have with the mods, it kind of takes it away here. But we're going to have solar and arc damage resistance. So when we're up close and personal on enemies, that's going to help us stay alive, as well as those grenade launcher reserves for our Forbearance, just so we can hold more of those bolts and grenades. Now, on our boots, again, we're going to have another Melee Wellmaker, as well as Orb of Restoration and Enhanced Sword Scavenger. So we're going to get those sword pickups. We're going to get more ammo for our Hero of Ages. And then when we do pick up Orbs of Restoration, when we're playing with other Guardians or just Orbs of Power in general, we get a small amount of energy to the ability with the least energy. So just a little bit that you'll notice here and there, getting your energy back for your grenade, melee, or your shield. And last but not least, on our class item here, we have Trace Evidence. So defeating combatants affected by arc debuffs spawn ionic traces. Super important for this build because with our blinding shoulder charge, as well as our blinding detonations from our grenade launcher here when we're amplified, all of those enemies that are affected by that blind, when we defeat them, they will spawn ionic traces, which when we collect those in turn, we're going to be getting our arc abilities back even faster. And then on top of that, we do have Amped Up to stay amplified longer, which just helps us keep those aspects and fragments procced to keep blinding melees, as well as the blinding grenade launcher up pretty much at all times because of this Amped Up and with the infinite melee. And then our third and final Melee Wellmaker. So as you can see with this build, you never have to stop meleeing because of the Insurmountable Skull Fort, and we are always amplified because of our fragment and aspect inside of Knockout. So when we get those melee defeats, we become amplified, and then we get it back because of Insurmountable Skullfort. So it's a big positive feedback loop of always blinding enemies, always creating ionic traces based on our mod trace evidence, and then we're also blinding enemies inside of our shoulder charge and with our forbearance because of Spark of Beacons. So it is a crazy synergetic build for our Titan here with blinding enemies. No PvE is going to be able to see what's going on, and it slows down enemies so much, especially when you're doing something that has waves and waves of enemies, or if you're getting in a tight situation, having that blinding ability to kind of stall enemies out, because it's for a good amount of time that they don't really attack or move at you. So definitely try this build out. Very meta this season with Arc 3.0, and that forbearance with that chain reaction and ambitious assassin with Spark of Beacons just in general is absolutely nasty, but especially on this build, being able to be always amplified with our melee and always have our melee back instantly because of our exotic. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you can try this out. Make sure y'all are wearing your gold this month. Thank y'all for the support. Absolutely banging this season. I'll talk to you guys next time. Enjoy. Peace.